Ladies and gentlemen, it's our privilege to have New York Times best-selling author, went to Emerson College, Erik Sherman, who is now on his 9th baseball book. Most recently, on June 23rd of last year, Daybreak at Chavez Ravine, Randomania, very critically acclaimed. But his list of prior books, each one as good as the previous. Out at Home about Glenn Burke. Pirate for Life about Steve Blass. Mookie Wilson, 86 Mets. Davey Johnson, manager of the 86 Mets. After the Miracle with Art Shamsky. King of Queens about the 86 Mets. Two Sides of Glory about the 86 Red Sox. And now currently working on a book about one of my favorite players, Dwight Evans. Erik is an annual lecturer in Cooperstown, and most recently an inductee into the class of 2024 New York State Baseball Hall of Fame. Please welcome Erik, sir.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you so much for having me here. And, you know, I just want to congratulate everyone that had anything to do with making this magnificent New York State Baseball Hall of Fame. I mean, it is just a treasure. It's beyond my wildest dreams and expectations, and it's really a great honor. I think I'm the first author to speak here, right?
Yes, for sure.
That's an honor too. So I'm going to talk about two books today that encompass the incredible 1986 season and postseason. The more recent of the two, Two Sides of Glory, the 1986 Boston Red Sox in their own words, and Kings of Queens, Life Beyond Baseball with the 86 Mets. Can everyone hear me okay? Everything's good? Okay, I'm not going to use the microphone then. So before I talk about each of the two books, and if anyone has any questions along the way, you know, we're a small enough intimate group that, you know, just raise your hand. I had the same formula with both the books. So what I did was I flew around the country to meet the most intriguing and the starters, the most intriguing players from both of these teams, wherever they lived, wherever they worked, wherever they coached in some instances, all around the country, to really capture them in their environment, you know. And from that, I put a little bit of myself into each book. What I was thinking, you know, my thoughts on what they were saying, how I described the environment where I was visiting. So the formula was the same. And what amazed me most about the interviews that I did was how open these players were. To a man, they were all just extremely open with me. And a trust factor was quickly built with each and every one of them. I was telling Mike before, he asked me, you know, what was it like to, you know, to do the research and to ask the questions, and how were the players with me. After a few days with them, it almost felt like I was a priest or a therapist or their best friend. A lot of times they would tell me things that they didn't even share with their own wives. And that made each of the chapters, which really were literary portraits of each of the players, all the more meaningful. You know, I just want to say one thing before I forget it. This particular book, and Rennie and I were talking about it before, you know, he asked me, well, what was the, you know, your favorite book? And that's, of the now 9 books, that's like choosing amongst your children. It's very, very hard to do. But I just think that Two Sides of Glory may have had the biggest impact. That one and probably After the Miracle, which I'll touch on. I'm not going to talk about it today, but I'll touch on it. I'm at the point in my writing career, it's not just about writing books, but it's about uncovering facts that nobody knew about publicly. It's about making a difference. With this Red Sox book, a week doesn't go by when some lifelong Red Sox fan doesn't reach out to me and say, you know what? Your book humanized those guys. I now feel completely different about how I look at that '86 Red Sox team. I'm over the defeat because of your book. Because now I know how much those guys cared and still care. And I'll get into that a little bit more. The After the Miracle book, I felt like we actually made a little bit of history in that book, in that Art Shamsky, my co-author, and I, we got Bud Harrelson to travel with us to New York, Ron Swoboda to travel from New Orleans, Jerry Kuzman to travel from Minneapolis, and we all converged on San Francisco International Airport. I rented a big van, and we drove up to see Tom Seaver for the last visit that these 69 Miracle Mets would ever have together. And the thing I took away from it, after a morning on the vineyard with them all, on Seaver's vineyard in Calistoga, and then lunch afterwards, was in the parking lot in Calistoga after our lunch. They just mulled around for over an hour. Nobody wanted to leave because they knew this was going to be the last time these guys were ever going to get together again. I mean, Kuzman and Seaver, inseparable in Mets and baseball history as the 1 and 2 for so many years. Swoboda making the miracle catch, which allowed Seaver to have the only his only World Series victory. Buddy Harrelson was Seaver's roommate on the road for 10 years, his best friend in baseball. And then there was Art Shamsky as well, who kind of is like the Pied Piper of that '69 Mets team, who's really checked in on those guys and still does all these years, and is really taking Buddy Harrelson's passing very badly. So it's, when you write these books, it's to move people. It's to uncover things that they never knew and to really glorify the game. It's not to say that I'm a homer, you know, or as the old timers would call it, a jock sniffer, you know, or anything like that. I just truly have a love for this game, and I do ask the tough questions when it's appropriate. You know, I talked to Roger Clemens for 7 hours for this book. I mean, that's the most time any writer has probably ever had with Clemens, who's somewhat mistrusting of the press, like so many of them are. And of course, the elephant in the room about steroids. You know, you can't be afraid, but you can't, as a writer, that can't be your first question. You know, that's got to be 4 hours into the conversation when you built up the trust. And then they were like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. I did a radio show with Rich Gedman, and the host asked Rich Gedman, how is it that Erik got you to open up as much as you did in the book? And Rich said, well, a few things. He said he really knows his baseball. He knows what it's like to be a baseball player, because I played for many, many, many years through college and for a couple of decades after college. And there's a sensitivity, you know, like I really care for these guys. You know, I know what they went through, you know, the triumphs and the defeats, and I feel for them, and that comes through. And so I think, oh, I don't want to put myself on any type of pedestal at all, but I think I have a talent of getting these players' deepest thoughts, and those are conveyed in the books. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the '86 Red Sox book first. So the Kings of Queens book came out first, and I'll just say that I ended up doing 4 Mets-related books. And when people ask me, well, you know, how do you decide the topic of a book? A lot of times, it just comes organically. I did a book with Mookie Wilson, his autobiography. Through Mookie, I met Bobby Ojeda, Keith Hernandez, Ron Darling. And during a book signing, Mookie's wife, Rosa, said to me, you know, it would be great, kind of like a, you know, what are they doing now type of book on the '86 Mets. And so that led to that book. Davey Johnson, who did the foreword for the '86 Mets book, said that Kings of Queens was his favorite baseball book he's ever read, and he's a big-time reader. And so he said, you're the guy to do my autobiography. His book was the most difficult book I've ever had to do. It was like almost 130,000 words, whereas the others are between like 80 and 100,000. He just was like the Forrest Gump of baseball, in that he just always seemed to be at history's doorstep as it happened. You know, hit the last home run against Koufax in the '66 series. You know, was there the night that Hank Aaron surpassed Babe Ruth as a member of the Braves. Was there when Sadahara O, you know, surpassed Aaron. You know, so he was always there, like just at the right time, again and again and again. And of course, as a manager, you know, was there when Mookie hit the roller through Buckner's legs. Just a witness to baseball history. And then that led to, after the Miracle, my agent said, Art Shamsky's interested in doing a book on the '69 Mets. And I'm like, another one. You know, because it's something like 40 books have been written about that team. And he said, well, have lunch with Art, and you know, you guys will figure out an angle that's never been looked at before. And so with that, there was a book entitled Teammates, about when Johnny Pesky, it was the last visit to see Ted Williams. Johnny Pesky, Bobby Doerr, and Dom DiMaggio, right. Had, you know, made a plan to go down and see Ted Williams when he was on his deathbed for a last visit. And so that inspired me to do After the Miracle. And Roger Kahn was a tremendous influence through his Boys of Summer. So I got the idea to do this book really through Boys of Summer. And then that led to this one. So that's a good segue into Two Sides of Glory, which I have some notes on. First of all, like I said, this book humanized those players, and it got a lot of positive play. In fact, Rennie, I think I have 2 copies of this, so I'll leave this one here as well. Baseball Digest. As a kid, I was one of those kids that collected Baseball Digests. And it's beautiful too, because like the old ones, it was much smaller, but it was almost like a little book. And it had the dates along the side. I see a lot of you smiling. You all know what I'm talking about. So I collected them for years. So my publicist contacted me and said, and asked, Erik, would you mind if Baseball Digest ran an excerpt from your Red Sox book? And I'm like, are you kidding? Of course. You know, they could redo the whole book if they want. So they took what I know is Rennie's favorite chapter in the book. They took it on the Bill Buckner chapter. And so this one, you know, they have a picture of the book, and it's just really impressive. So before I forget, there you go, sir. Okay, so my elevator pitch, and if you were at the Hall of Fame yesterday, you heard me talk about it, is no team in the history of baseball has realized the highest of highs and the lowest of lows within a 2-week period, more so than the Boston Red Sox. I mean, this is such an astute group, but I can't assume anything. The Red Sox, in Game 5 of the best-of-7 series against the California Angels, which is what they were called at the time, Donnie Moore just throwing BBs, and Dave Henderson, injured, is up there looking very much like Bernie Carbo did, just in the '75 series, just overwhelmed. And somehow, some way, Dave Henderson connects, one strike from elimination, hits the home run, puts the Red Sox up by a run. What people forget is the Angels tie it in the bottom half of that inning, and then Henderson, in extra innings, gets the sacrifice fly, gives the Red Sox a miraculous comeback victory. They go back to Boston, and the Angels just had no chance. I was at both those games, and the Red Sox blew them out in both games. So now the Red Sox, they're just totally playing with house money. The Mets, yeah.
Donnie Moore took his life after that.
He did. He did.
They attributed to that.
He never got over it. Yeah. Yep. He did. He put a gun to his head and killed himself. 3 years after the fact. He just couldn't get over it. The Mets were playing their historic. I just happened to glance up at the Astros banner when I said that. The baseball gods are here. So they could not beat Mike Scott in that series. Mike Scott and his scuffball were just bedeviling the Mets in their '86 National League Championship Series. They knew, the Mets knew in Game 6 they had to win that game because they were facing Freddy Krueger, as Bobby Ojeda called it, in Game 7. And they knew in their heart of hearts they weren't going to win a Game 7 in Houston against Mike Scott. They go 16 innings, and they win it. Flight back to, well, so they win the pennant. The celebration on the plane is just epic. And, I mean, they're hungover like you wouldn't believe. Not really prepared for the first game. They get shut out 1-0 to Bruce Hurst. Game 2, what was supposed to be the game of the ages. Dwight Gooden against Roger Clemens, the two best young pitchers in baseball, facing off. Both pitchers didn't have it. And the Red Sox go up 2-0. So they end up, the Mets end up taking 2 out of 3 in Boston. So the Red Sox go into game 6, needing just to win that game to break a 68-year curse, the curse of the Bambino. And they're one strike away again. And they just could not get that final out. The Mets get 3 straight hits. And then, Mookie, who I wrote his autobiography with, just hits this ball that bounced like 3 or 4 times and gets through Buckner's legs. Mets are alive. Game 7. Red Sox take a 3-0 lead, just like they did in the '75 series. Couldn't hold on. The Mets win. They win the World Series. The Red Sox, like I said, 1 strike away from winning it. Can't hold on. So the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. It's actually a good segue. We just talked about Game 6. You remember before I talked about trying to discover things that had never been in print? Well, I did about Game 6. I interviewed Marty Barrett, who was everybody's pick to one day become a big league manager from that Red Sox team. He was really the only guy. He and Spike Owen were the only 2 non-superstars in that just loaded Red Sox lineup. So Barrett, after the pass ball, which tied the game, Mookie's at the plate, the pass ball from Stanley gets by Gedman. Ray Knight's on second base. And Ray Knight's a very emotional guy, still is. And he's just jumping up and down around second base. He's not a speedster either. And Marty Barrett astutely realizes Ray Knight's like 40 feet off second base. This This is an easy pickoff. So Barrett signals in to get Gedman for the pickoff play. Now on a pickoff play, the second baseman, if he's going to get the ball, he's got to shade over towards second base, which Barrett does. Buckner knows the play's on, so just in case the call is missed, he's got to shade over towards second. Now Buckner was on two. I mean, he was like a cripple. I mean, he could barely move. He had two just badly injured Achilles heels. So Buckner's over further towards the second base hole than normal. So Mookie, who never pulls the ball, hits this bouncer going right down the right field line. So now Buckner's got to somehow get his injured body into position, which he does a pretty good job of. The ball somehow just hit a pebble or something, and after bouncing, just flatlined, and it didn't come up, and it went through his legs into right field. And so many people talk about, you know, how, yeah, the Red Sox lost the World Series because of Buckner. It's not true at all. There were so many missteps before that. Like Clemens, who started the game, didn't want to come out. You know, this is something that Clemens and I talked at length about in the book. Clemens wanted to stay in. He had developed a blister at the end of the 7th inning. So literally there was blood on the ball when he would pitch. But he told me he didn't want out of the game. In fact, he put his batting helmet on to bat in the top of the 8th. He told me that the only effect it was having on him was when he threw the curveball. And of the 5 hits the Mets had gotten against him that night, 3 of them were off the curveball. So he had already told Gedman, look, no more curveballs tonight for the rest of the night, just fastballs and off-speed pitches, and we'll be fine. Well, McNamara didn't want to take any chances. And this isn't just coming from Clemens. Barrett was right there when the discussion was taking place. It was McNamara's decision to pull Clemens with a 1-run lead going into the 8th. And I actually received a letter after the book came out from Joe Morgan, not the Hall of Fame second baseman, but a coach with the Red Sox who later went on to manage, and he had this incredible winning streak his first year as a manager. They called it Morgan's Miracle. Joe Morgan, who's in his 90s, sent me a handwritten letter after he read the book, and he said, yeah, Al Nipper came into the bullpen where Morgan was, and he said, Clemens didn't want out. You know, this is all on McNamara. And so, Schiraldi, who had struggled in the postseason, and the Mets knew he was a Met. He was traded to the Red Sox as a part of the Bobby Ojeda deal, which got the Mets Bobby Ojeda, their best pitcher in 1986, even better than Gooden. The Mets knew enough about Schiraldi that he wasn't up for the big moment. And Schiraldi had an incredible second half of the season when the Red Sox called him up from the minor leagues. He had a 1.41 ERA as a closer. He was magnificent. But in the postseason, under big-time pressure situations, he wasn't the same guy, and the Mets knew that. The Mets, believe it or not, all were fearful they would bring in Bob Stanley. Now, Stanley had a fine Red Sox career, but in '86 had like a 4.37 ERA. And I was in Boston actually covering the Red Sox that summer. Bob Stanley was not the same pitcher. I mean, he was not the way he was. I mean, he once was one of the best relievers in baseball, no longer. Schiraldi was much better that season. But the Mets, I even talked to Keith Hernandez about this, they didn't want any part of Bob Stanley and his sinker. So anyway, they bring in Schiraldi, and sure enough, they were able to tie the game off of him. And then after the Red Sox take the 2-run lead in extra innings, The Mets start their comeback, and they bring in Stanley, and the rest is history. Yeah.
Schiraldi threw the wild pitch, right?
Stanley.
Oh, Stanley, okay.
Yeah. Schiraldi could not get that last out. And they got 3 straight hits off of him. And that's when McNamara went to the bullpen to bring in Stanley. And I talked to Stanley in the book, and Gedman, was there a missed sign? And Gedman puts the blame on himself. He said, no, I should have caught it. We were setting up inside, but I was showing them outside. But Gedman's such a prince of a man that I'm not sure if I fully buy it. I think they were crossed up. You look at and then Gedman feels like if he had picked the ball up on the first try instead of 2, that he may have been able to get Kevin Mitchell at home plate. So, not Buckner's fault, but I will tell you that in this book, I did the last interview of Buckner's life, and he went out there for years. He did signings with Mookie. He put all 3 of his kids through college, signing that photo of Mookie running up the first baseline, and just as the ball goes through his legs. He made over $1 million signing that photo. Mookie too, and they were kind of like the modern day Ralph Branca and Bobby Thompson. They would go around signing that photo as adversaries. Buckner's wife was against it. Jody was just like, why would you do that? And he says, well, for all the pain I've been through, I want something back for it. And sure enough, he would do signings and around the minor leagues, and every once in a while, like one time a young fan, wanted him to sign a ball, and some 18-year-old kid said, hey, you better not flip it to him, he'll drop it. And Buckner went ballistic. Another time, Buckner had dropped his kids off at school, and he's at a stop sign, and the car behind him is in a hurry, and it's like beeping, to move. So Buckner gets out of his car, and he goes, you got a problem? And the person recognized, the man recognized who it was, and he starts berating Buckner about the ball going through his legs. And so Buckner, grabs the guy's arm, and the guy freaks out. He just hauls ass. He just gets his car out of there, and Buckner went after him for a while, and before he calmed down. But Buckner for years would go on and talk about how this was meant to be. It was meant to happen to me, so I could send out a message to people that have struggled in life and have had things happen to them, and how they can surpass that. And but the fact of the matter was, I did the last interview with him, and he said, you know what, Eric, the scars are still there. He still remembered his kindergarten son going to school, and one of the teachers saying to his son, your dad's not playing baseball anymore because of the error. A 5-year-old kid. So this just went on and on and on. And despite Buckner saying, yeah, I'm over it, he never got over it. It was, and this was a guy that had a 2,715 career hits, won a batting title, had a higher fielding percentage than Lou Gehrig, and this is what your casual fan remembers about him. Every October, Buckner would tell me, he'd turn on a postseason game, and they would replay that era over and over and over again. How unfair is this? This guy has, he's a 4-decade player, 69 through 90, and this is what people remember.
He came up as a teenager.
Yeah. Just a magnificent career.
So he was recognized back in Fenway as kind of a clearing eventually, right? And to what level did that kind of healed some of those wounds? I know that you still got scars, but did that go a long way in?
It's somewhat. So he didn't go back when. So the Red Sox, when they break the curse, ironically, after 86 years. 86 series. After 86 years, they break the curse in 2004. So 2005, on opening day, they bring back a lot of the Red Sox players, from the past. That now it's over. Now the burden's been lifted. Buckner did not go, but they announced his name, and he got the biggest ovation from the fans. So the Red Sox, they win again in 2007. So they do the same thing again in 2008. This time Buckner does return, and he throws out the first pitch to Dwight Evans. And Dwight Evans and I, we talk about this in our upcoming autobiography of his life, which is going to be out in July. Selfish plug. And Evans said he was crying like a baby. The crowd was just, Fenway was shaking.
Evans was crying, or?
No, Buckner. And they got through it. However, Buckner noticed there were several banners in the stands, and they all pretty much had the same message. Hey Buck, we forgive you. Now we forgive you. And Buckner's like, forgive me. I forgive you, for all this. And of course, later on, became a little bit easier. He goes on Curb Your Enthusiasm with Larry David, and they make a whole episode out of him, dropping things. He dropped a baseball, went out the window. It was a ball signed by Mookie. It was a great episode. But then he has redemption at the end of the episode when there's a fire, and a fireman has to toss a baby out the window, and Buckner catches it. And it's a great episode. Anyway, so I went over, why this book now. So I often get asked when I do books, what surprised you the most about the book? To me, it was Oil Can Boy. I was thinking, I knew Oil Can a little bit from back in the 80s, and he was nuts. He got riled up easily. He was doing drugs back in the 80s, and that made him a bit unhinged at times. He didn't make the All-Star team in '86, and he's calling Dick Hauser a racist. He's like he shoved a Boston cameraman. He gets suspended for, I want to say, 3 weeks. And, that cost him 4 or 5 starts. And he won 16 games that year anyway. So he would have been a 20-game winner. But Oil Can was kind of like to the 86 Red Sox what Bill Lee was to the 75 Red Sox. A little bit unhinged, that type of thing. Although I love Bill. And Oil Can too. So what I didn't expect when I met with Oil Can was he's two people. He's this street kid from Mississippi, who speaks in Ebonics. Am I pronouncing it? Ebonics. But then, when you start talking about, the Negro Leagues and Satchel Paige, then he's like totally different. He's brilliant about the history of the Negro Leagues, the history of America, and he's fairly eloquent, almost like a college professor. And that just, it just left such an imprint on me. I'm like, wow. I mean, this guy can talk to anybody, about anything. It just depends on the subject. And how he was able to turn that on and off, it was really impressive. I may not have agreed with everything that he said. Doesn't really give Jackie Robinson a whole lot of credit. Oil Can feels as if integrating Major League Baseball, while it was something that had to happen, actually took away from almost the circus atmosphere of the Negro Leagues. The characters, from the Negro Leagues. That kind of went away quite a bit with integration. So whether you believe that or not, I don't know. But that really impressed me. Another thing that surprised me was how funny Bob Stanley is. You know, you look at Bob Stanley.
I would have never thought that.
No. The guy, he has this long face, you know, never smiles in public or on the mound. You know, wasn't exactly a physical specimen. He kind of always reminded me of the guy you'd see on the Metro North on the way home. You know, the guy just worked like a whole week, and he's just going to go home and have a scotch. You know, it's a tough week. He just kind of looked like that kind of guy. This guy, his self-deprecating humor is Bob Eucherish. I mean, one after another. One of my favorite lines was, he's warming up at the bullpen. He's just signed $1 million a year contract, which was big money back in 1984, I think it was, with the Red Sox. $1 million a year. And some fan yelled out at him and said, hey, Steamer, you're worth every penny. It's the dollars I'm worried about. And Stanley looked over and said, that is terrific. I'm going to use that one. And so he used it with me. And so he just had a lot of those. Let me see if I had another one down here from him. No, I guess not. But he had a whole lot of them. And the irony is he ended up working for the Mets for a while. And he was doing an autograph signing. And an older Red Sox fan, an older woman, goes, so Bob, what are you doing now? And he says, well, I'm doing some scouting for the Mets. And she took his autograph card and ripped it up. I mean, so he had those types of stories.
Erik, how about Dwight Evans in the '86? What did he have to say?
Well, you know, like I said, we did an autobiography together because he, you know, his pastor was always trying to get him to write a book. And he had put it off for so many years because Dwight Evans has had a really painful existence. But unlike so many other ball players, he's still happily married after 53 years to a wife he married when he was 18 years old. So he had an inner struggle that a lot of people don't know about. He raised 2 boys with neurofibromatosis, which is often confused with elephant man's disease. It's the 2 sons, almost from birth, had tumors in their nerves. And both had over 40 surgeries. And there were many nights when Dewey would come straight from a hospital, go straight to the ballpark. And even his teammates didn't really know close to the full extent of what he was going through. And yet he was able to have this magnificent career. 19 years with the Red Sox, 20 years overall. He played his final year, which is a travesty with Baltimore. The Red Sox should have signed him. But anyway, you know, he still managed to put up incredible numbers. But to answer your question, Rennie, about '86, you know, he goes back to opening day. The Red Sox are facing Jack Morris, who's in the Hall of Fame, a great pitcher from the Tigers. They're playing at Tiger Stadium, and Dwight Evans is leading off the game because another hitter in their lineup, I won't say his name, but he won a lot of batting titles. Dwight asked me not to say his name, but he won a lot of batting titles, and he didn't want to lead off because the press was after him. Why aren't you driving in more runs? Why aren't you hitting more home runs and all this? So anyway, so Dewey is leading off. And early in spring training, Dewey had a premonition that it was opening day at Tiger Stadium. He knew he was going to be facing Jack Morris, because Jack Morris was their best pitcher for years. And he had a premonition that on the first pitch of the season, he was going to hit a home run off Jack Morris. And he knew that Jack Morris would want to get off to a quick start. You know, sellout crowd, everyone's got those opening day jitters. He was going to want to get that first strike right over the heart of the plate. So Dewey tells a few people. He tells Marty Barrett, maybe his best friend on the team. And Marty goes, man, that sounds great, that sounds great. He makes the mistake of telling Walt Riniak. And Riniak goes nuts. He's like, no, you're not going to try to hit a home run. No, you're just going to try to hit a line drive up the middle. That's what you're going to do. Okay, got it? And Dewey's like, yeah. Okay. And you know, Riniak was a tremendous batting coach and really turned the career of Evans around, helped Buckner enormously. Ted Williams gave him all kinds of troubles because their hitting philosophies were very different. But anyway, so Evans, you know, he's getting ready to go up, and Riniak says, remember what I told you, right? Line drive up the middle. That's what you want to do. Yeah. So he goes to Barrett. I'm taking Morris downtown. So he gets up there, and sure enough, fastball right over the middle. And Dewey hits the ball at the old Tiger Stadium, right by the flagpole, by the 400-foot sign. Home run. Evans said, he felt like my feet weren't even touching the ground. I mean, he was nervous, and he saw that pitch, and he just got all of it. Hits the home run, and he knew, right, and the Red Sox actually would end up losing the game, but they ended up hitting 3 home runs off Morris that day, and, you know, the Tigers were, you know, 16 months removed from finishing off one of the greatest dominating seasons of all time. The '84 Tigers were in first place from day one to the end of the season, and then just, you know, they dominated the Padres in the World Series. So, I mean, that was a great team. And, but Evans was like, you know what? You know, we can beat this Tigers team. And so the other thing that Evans said, and like so many of the other guys said, after Clemens struck out 20 later that month, they knew that they had a shot to win the title. Now, they were coming off a 500 season in '85, but they picked up Don Baylor, who was led the team in RBIs. People forget, because he didn't play a lot in the World Series, because he had the DH rule only in Boston, I believe. That's the way it was then. But I mean, he was a tremendous, he ran the Kangaroo Court in the clubhouse. So they picked up just a tremendous clubhouse presence in Donnie Baylor. And then you had Clemens, you know, who was coming off about 1.5 years of injuries, arm injuries, but he was all the way back. And they knew that night that with Clemens, to go along with Hurst and Oil Can as a number 3, and Nipper, who was a serviceable number 4. Then they pick up Seaver at the end of June, and now they're like, well, now they've got like a Donnie Baylor for the pitchers. Seaver had a tremendously positive influence on Clemens and Hurst. You know, they really learned how to pitch, and like the mental game from Seaver. That was a tremendous deal. So with Clemens, the night he strikes out 20, he's on the cover of Sports Illustrated. He became a superstar overnight. That game that he struck out 20, people forget, going into the 8th inning, the Red Sox were losing 1-0. And a few things happened. Don Baylor was playing first, and he dropped a ball, and that helped Clemens actually get his 20 strikeouts instead of 19. The other thing was, it was Dwight Evans who hit a 3-run homer in the bottom of the 8th to give the Red Sox the lead and to really set Clemens up for one of the greatest games ever pitched. He gets the victory in 9 innings, strikes out 20. And that was really, and what's funny, I think that game, it was the lowest attendance of any game all season long for the Red Sox. I remember it well. It was like 45 degrees and windy. It's like your typical late April game in Boston, but it was at night. And the Celtics were playing in the semifinals, I think. It was a big game. So everyone was watching the Celtics. So, but what started happening was, as word was getting out what Clemens was doing, you know, when he had like 14, 15 strikeouts, 16 strikeouts, people started entering the ballpark late, which you could do then. The Red Sox were very lax in those days with security. And people were coming in from the neighborhood, you know, to see if Clemens could get to 20 strikeouts. So, so that was a big night, and that really set the stage for the rest of the season. Let's see. All right. So, before I go on, are there any questions?
Mets and Red Sox like each other, didn't like each other?
Ojeda, who was traded in the Schiraldi deal, couldn't stand being a Red Sox. His famous quote in my book with him was, "I felt like a square peg in a round hole with the Mets. But with the Mets, we were all round holes." Like, I felt like I was one of those guys. And Ojeda was a partier, you know, just like almost all the 86 Mets with maybe 2 or 3 exceptions. So he'd fit right in. He described the Red Sox, the 85 Red Sox anyway, I mean, very different team from the 86 team, but he described the 85 Red Sox as some stodgy, you know, golf club, you know, old guys smoking cigars and, you know, didn't like to have fun and that type of thing. So that changed, I think, in 86 to a degree. But I think there was a good deal of respect. You know, Evans has a tremendous amount of respect for both the Mets and the Yankees. I think if, you know, there's always that Munson-Fisk rivalry. I think a lot of those Red Sox guys actually had more respect for Munson, if they spoke the truth, just based on conversations I've had. There's a tremendous amount of admiration around baseball for Munson. Any question?
Yeah, actually, 2 quick questions. The first one, when you said Ojeda didn't like being a Red Sox and it was welcome to come to the Mets. Did the Mets lose a guy in free agency? The same thing. He won the World Series. His name was Mike pitched left-handed. And then he signed with the Rockies the following year after winning the series. He hated being a Met. He didn't want to be around that crowd.
I'm sorry, the lefty was who?
The lefty is, all I remember is his first name was Mike, and he signed with the Rockies.
Oh, Mike Hampton?
That's it, yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't want to be around that atmosphere. And he had a great season with them.
He did. He did. He won 20, didn't he?
I think so.
Yeah.
But I know he was in the playoffs.
2000 or something like that, 2001?
I thought it was 86. I thought he won the
Yeah.
series with them.
Hampton was much later.
He was later, okay.
Yeah.
My bad.
No, that's okay.
The other thing, when you were talking about Buckner and, you know, humanizing everything, I couldn't help but think, to ask the question, you couldn't ever write a book on the Chicago Cubs and Steve Bartman.
Oh, Bartman.
The maligned,
Who was it that had Bartman?
that was Chicago, wasn't
You,
it?
right?
Jesus Salute.
Somebody had, yeah. Somebody had Bartman's contact information. And I want to say I tried to reach out to him. Does everybody knows the story?
He's in the witness protection program, isn't he? The witness relocation.
Guy got blamed.
If not, he won't be if he asks.
You know, so he had to leave Chicago. He had to, and for a while, his coworkers protected him, and they said, you know, don't worry, we're not going to tell anybody that you work here. But eventually, he had to leave, and it's tragic, you know, because if you look at that play, you know, there were other fans that were going for the ball too, and you know, he went to the game on his own. You know, he had the big headphone on. He was listening to the game on the radio. You could tell he was a loner who, you know, the Cubs, you know, the Cubs were his comfort. You know, he probably spent a good deal of his paycheck to go to that game, and it breaks your heart, you know, really. And people were throwing stuff at him, but honestly, if you look at that foul ball going in the stands, there were 2 other fans reaching for the ball too. And I saw that replay a lot of times. It almost seems like one of the other fans had more to do with the Lou not getting it. Anyway,
Yeah,
it's just...
Buckman was sitting down, and it was way out of the reach of a Lou to begin with,
Yeah.
but the fans just went poo-poo for crazy puffs.
And then, you know, everything just unraveled for the Cubs after that.
Yeah.
You know, they had the curse of the Billy Goat, you know. Red Sox had the curse.
You know,
of the
just like you said with Buckner, though, that game was lost
Oh.
before that play. And everybody remembers
Yeah.
that play.
And they still had to play the next night.
And so,
right, again.
so there's a lot that happens before and after the thing that's the story.
Right.
And that's what you brought out in Buckner.
Right.
Did Buckner give you like any reason or any indication as to why he didn't survive that to continue his career? Because this stuff has happened in the past, like in 2001, Mariano Rivera blew the game and they ended up losing there. He still ended up pitching after. What was the reason?
He still blames Brocious for that. He does.
Oh, okay. But like he continued his, most athletes can deal with adversity. They know how to.
Well, Mariano Rivera, I mean, he was, you know, undisputedly the greatest relief pitcher of all time. I mean, nobody's perfect. You know, I don't think Rivera, you know, was going to let any blown game, you know, ruin his career. I mean, that's just the life of the relief pitcher. They compartmentalize better than anybody. You know, the relief pitchers have short memories. You know, they're fine. But you were saying about Buckner.
Yeah.
Buckner continued playing. In fact, he returned for a brief time to the Red Sox, and I think it was '88 or '89. You know, first he went to the Royals, and then went to the Angels, and then back to Boston. And I'm pretty sure he retired as a Red Sox. I mean, it was a short stint, but he did go back. Funny story, you know, that's in, I think, both these books. So Mookie, in '89, hasn't seen Buckner since '86. Mookie gets traded to the Toronto Blue Jays, and Buckner's with the Royals. So, but it's before the game. Again, neither have seen each other since the '86 series. And so Mookie, you know, he's stretching in the outfield, and all of a sudden, Buckner is walking towards the outfield. And Mookie's like, oh man, I forgot, Buckner's with the Royals. And Mookie for 2.5 years is, you know, Mookie's such a sweetheart. You know, he's just like, you know, I felt awful. You know, I like ruined this guy's life with my ground ball. So, you know, he didn't reach out. He just felt really, really bad. So Buckner, taking the high road, knew that Mookie felt bad about it. You know, he knew enough about Mookie that he's a sensitive guy. And so now they're going to confront one another. So Buckner completely makes it easy on Mookie. And he goes, hey, Mook, hey, would you do me a favor? Can we go back and would you hit me some ground balls? And it completely, you know, distinguished any tension, and it was just a beautiful moment. They both had a good laugh over it. And then, like I said, once they both stopped playing, they became business partners and did really well together. But a great friendship, you know, unlike, unfortunately, how things ended up for Ralph Branca and Bobby Thompson. Everybody knows that story, right?
Yeah.
Wall Street Journal reported years and years later, I think around like 2000 or 2001.
Years later, yeah.
I mean, you imagine? I mean, these guys are touring together for decades, you know, making piles of money together, and they're friends, posing for photos. And all those years, Bobby Thompson had a secret. He knew what Branca was going to throw because the Giants were cheating. You know, they had somebody with binoculars in the outfield apparently, from like the second half of the 51 season onwards, and they were able to come back. Just incredible. And their friendship was over, as far as I understand. Like, they were never the same after that. But that wasn't the case for Mookie and Buckner, so.
Do you know if Mookie went to his funeral?
So when Buckner died, I reached out to Mookie, and I was careful. I said, Mookie, you know, did you hear the news? Because I didn't want to shock him. And he said, no, I haven't heard of anything today. And I said to him, well, you know, this is going to be a bit of a shock, because I knew Mookie had just seen him a couple of months before. I said, you know, Buck, he died today. And he had Jody Buckner's information, but my understanding is that he did not go. So Buckner and I talked for 2 years about doing a book. And, you know, we did book proposals, and he said, if it's okay with Jody, it's okay with me. And Jody would say, if it's okay with Bill, it's okay with me. And at the end of the day, you know, they just both decided, you know what, this is going to be too painful, because it's going to be the same question over and over. And when you promote a book, I mean, you're doing, I mean, probably 100 interviews. And, you know, they knew that that moment in time was going to be relived all those times. And that's why we did it.
As a journalist, though, could you have decided for yourself, I'm going to write a book that's 99% about how great he was? Or would your publisher not want you to? You want the dirt?
Well, you know, I covered it in this book, I think. I don't think there's a whole lot more to it. Like, some people are like, well, you know, you knew Bill, you have lunch with him when he was in New York. You know, maybe you could write a book about him now. And I just don't know if there's any more really to tell. It was a long chapter, you know, and it talked about the evolution of how we met, which was through Mookie. And then, you know, Buckner and I became really good friends, where we would just talk on the phone. You know, Rennie does this, you know, with the Hall of Famers. You know what it's like. You know, you develop relationships with these guys, and, you know, they're more than happy. You know, like they enjoy it. Like Carl Erskine, who I interviewed for Daybreak and Chavez Ravine. You know, I mean, he had such a tremendous impact, not just on the Brooklyn Dodgers, but when the Dodgers moved to Los Angeles. You know, he pitched the first game ever for the Dodgers out there, and, you know, all that. And at the end of the interview, I mean, Erskine at the time was like 95, and he said to me, you know, please call me, you know, just to talk, you know. And a lot of these guys are like that once you get to know them, and you know.
I still talk to Erskine once every 3 weeks.
Yeah.
97.
And it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. So,
were Buck and Dewey friends?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. So there would, on any baseball team, there are cliques. Yeah. So it was always Evans, Barrett, and Buckner, and they would go out to lunch, and they would. Evans, we put it in his book, how they would, for a whole season, they were on like a carb diet called Eat to Win. And so they would only go to like pasta buffets all year. You know, Boggs had his guys where, you know, of course, they had to serve chicken. You know, that was, you know, he had chicken for lunch every day of his career from the end of the '82 season through the end of his career, because he was so superstitious.
He also had Margot.
He did. For a number of years, he did. So, yeah, Dewey and I, that's addressed in his book too, delicately. But that really hurt that ball club, the chemistry, a lot. You know, the Red Sox were a good team in '88 when all that came out. And there was infighting. There were some people that were, Boggs guys, and then the rest of the team, and what Margot was coming out with. I mean, she was talking about what it was like being around the other guys on the road. And ball players are ball players. Some of them cheat on their wives, or at best, it can appear like they're indiscretions. And she starts writing, and then she's writing about how, Jim Rice thinks he's white and all this crap. And so it really had a bad effect on the team and really hurt them. It may have kept them from winning another World Series. So anyway.
When's the Dwight Evans book coming out?
I'm sorry?
When is Dwight's book coming out?
July. It comes out originally it was going to be the spring. It's been pushed out to the middle of July this summer. So I've never heard of a book coming out in mid-July. It's the first. I mean, I guess in one sense, will probably be the #1 book on Amazon for a few weeks, for sure, because
Baseball season.
yeah, because baseball books tend to come out in March and April. Some come out in June, Father's Day, that type of thing. And then some come out in October. But I've never heard of a book coming out in the middle of July. But if you think about it, it's the middle of baseball season. People are going to the beach. And, it actually works well for us because, Dewey will be in Boston. He does the luxury suites, the legend suites, they call them, for the Red Sox during the summer. And so he'll be in Boston, so it'll make it easier for us to promote the book because he spends the rest of his year in Fort Myers. So
There's a case to be made for him in Cooperstown. I researched
Absolutely.
his body of work.
Absolutely.
His entire body of work, especially defensively, and his arm,
Oh, yeah.
and what an impact he had as a defensive outfielder. I can see a case being made.
I think he just needs the right committee, like Baines had. I mean, Baines, it was, the committee, he had lawyers on that committee, from his days with the White Sox, and I think 1 or 2 from the Orioles. Let's face it, I mean, that really helped Baines.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, Evans was the better player. 8 Gold Glove awards. Had more home runs than any American leaguer in the decade of the 80s. More extra base hits than any player in baseball during the decade of the 80s. He was one of those rare guys that got better the older he got. And a lot of that is attributed to Walt Riniak. But he always had a rifle for an arm. And was a tremendous right fielder, one of the best. He and Dave Parker were the best right fielders of their generation. I mean, that's another guy, Dave Parker. But Parker, there are other issues. He was caught up in the drug trials in Pittsburgh. He played for a whole bunch of teams, which hurts. So he kind of bounced around a little bit. But those two were tremendous players. So hopefully Dewey gets the call. I don't know when he's up again. It might be this year.
It is this year.
It is. Wow. Well, that could work out well.
The timing's really good.
I mean, it's kind of like some of you saw my talk yesterday with Daybreak at Chavez Ravine. I mean, what better time to come out with a book on Fernando than the summer that they decide finally to retire his number. I mean, that was just perfect timing. So.
Hey, Eric, you think Sherman Munson will see the Hall of Fame?
Munson?
Yeah.
So I hope so. He's one of those borderline guys. I mean, he had a 3-year period. He hit over 300. Drove over 100 RBIs each season. I want to say that's only been done maybe once or